Welcome to Mind and Soul Matters. We're delighted to share with you again another special presentation from a live forum. It is part of a series of live talks organised in collaboration between Mind and Soul Matters and Melville Baha'i Community to discuss issues around mental health in our society. I will leave the introduction of our presenter to Dr. Dina Ashurian, MC of the forum. Enjoy this very interesting and informative presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dina, and I'll be your MC this afternoon. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today and recognize their continuing connection to land, sea, and community. We offer our respect to their elders, to their culture, to the elders past, present, and emerging. I'd like to acknowledge Relationships Australia, as well as the Melville Baha'i Community for sponsoring today's forum. Today's event is part of a series of mental health and well-being forums where we explore relevant topics with the help of expert panel members. Baha'i communities all over the world are working to engage in social discourses on topics that are impacting our communities and our society at large. We are all here to grow in understanding of the mental health crisis facing our nation and how we can recognize and respond if faced with these challenges. Today's forum has a focus on the topic of family and well-being. Family well-being is likely to cover a number of elements. For example, physical and mental health, relationships, financial and housing security, connections to wider society, and the personal well-being of individual members of the family. Good family well-being can be understood as having a balanced combination of all these aspects, being resilient to changes in these elements, and ensuring that all individuals can benefit and contribute to the well-being of their family unit. So our first presenter today is Mrs. Nilly Cope. Nilly is a family therapist and relationship educator. She is committed to helping clients find clarity and resolution in their relationships. She studied psychology at UWA and later on went on to do a 2-year specialized training in family and relationships therapy. She is a member of the Psychotherapy and Counselors Association of Australia. And in her practice, Nilly regularly sees couples and families and helps them to move from challenges towards a deeper understanding and connection. She believes our homes should be like a fortress for well-being, where we feel both physically and emotionally safe and secure. Beyond her clinical work, Nilly is dedicated to psychoeducation, regularly facilitating courses on relationships and parenting at Relationships Australia. Drawing from her own 26-year marriage and the joys of raising 3 beautiful boys, she understands the importance of a supportive and harmonious home environment. So I will now pass the floor to Nilly Cope.
So I'm going to start by asking everyone a question. It's kind of a bit of a puzzle. Research has found that men that do this before they leave the house, and it takes only less than 10 seconds, live 4 years longer. Anyone have a guess what that is? I saw a hand go up first, then Mel, you second. Go. Kiss their wives. Very good. That's exactly right. And the reason I brought that up is because sometimes we think of relationships as sitting in their own bubble, but they have such an impact on our physiology, on our mental well-being, on our emotional well-being. So love is really a great healer. And on that, I want to tell you a little story about the Love Labs. So many years ago, 2 psychologists wanted to study relationships. This was John Gottman and Rob Levinson. And they wanted to do it in a way that was more normal. They didn't want to just bring couples into a lab. They didn't want to just see the ones that were having issues. So what they did, and it was very clever, they created these love labs. They hired out these apartments. They put video cameras everywhere. Then they invited couples who were newly married to come and stay for the weekend. So the video cameras obviously captured all their interactions from minute to minute, but they also were monitoring things like their heart rate, their blood pressure. They would do blood tests and so on. So they could see what was going on the outside, but also what was happening on the inside as these interactions were happening. And based on that research, which was with thousands of couples, and they've done it over several decades, so their data is really valid and reliable, they found that they could group people or couples into two groups. One group they called the masters, and the other group they called the disasters. So you might think, okay, like what did the masters do different to the disasters? What sort of behaviors did they have? So first of all, I want to tell you that disasters can become masters. And I regularly see this in my therapy room. So sometimes I might see a couple come back just after a few sessions and go, oh, we haven't had a fight the whole week. And, we thought about what you said and I was going to say this, but I said this instead. And, it just took a different trajectory. So it was some important learning that we can take away. And even though I can talk about this for several hours, I'm just going to pull a couple of things from their research to share with you. So the first thing they found was they were looking at bids for connection. So what do I mean by bid for connection? It's any time your partner wants to connect with you and they could make a remark, ask you a question. Really, it doesn't matter. It could be something nonverbal. And the masters were really good at turning towards, whereas the disasters kind of were turning away. So I'll give you an example. So they could have a couple sitting on the balcony. One's reading the paper, the other one's doing a crossword puzzle. And one of them says to the other, oh, look at that bird in the tree. So someone who was turning towards would go, oh, wow, isn't it colorful? I wonder what species it is. You see how they would engage with their partner. The ones who were turning away would be like, I'm reading my paper, please don't interrupt me. So you can see when the person who's turned away from, they crumble a little bit. And then when this happens again and again and again, they feel like an emotional distance. And it can really erode a relationship. Another example would be, say, one of them in this day and age, so you got a text and you just went, ah. So, someone who turns in might say, oh, honey, what's wrong? Whereas someone who's turning away might just ignore it. Or even worse, be like, Miss Drama Queen, what's going on now? You see that kind of air of sarcasm and so on. But I'm a numbers person. So I'm like, okay, the masters turn towards a lot compared to the disasters. But what is the difference? How often do we have to do it? What gives me an A? So it was 86% of the time. 86, that's a lot, isn't it? And this doesn't just happen, with partner relationship. Imagine you're sitting there at home on your laptop doing an important email and your kid comes telling you some long story about how they've changed the menu at the canteen. Do you stop and listen to them, or do you go, oh, mommy or daddy is busy right now, please come back later? So these are all examples of how we can turn towards or turn away. But another important thing that they found was the behavior of the masters versus the disasters during conflict. So I can tell you that the masters had a ratio of 5 positive to 1 negative interaction. And you might go, well, what's a positive interaction? Positive interaction would be seeking to understand the other one's perspective, like, oh, tell me more. Oh, I didn't know that affected you that way. Oh, that must have been hard. You know, you get it, that sort of thing. The negative interactions are things like being defensive, being critical, being angry, you know, in the way that we present with our tone, our body language, etc. So I told you what the masters did. Remember, it was 5 to 1. So what do you think the disasters were as far as comparison? Who thinks maybe they were a 3? What about a 2? Could I see a raise? Yeah, maybe a 2 or 1? 1 to 1? It was actually 0.8 to 1, believe it or not. So there was quite a big difference. So those are the sorts of behaviors that we can think about and change in our interactions. And I know it's really hard because when you're angry and upset, the last thing you want to do is be really understanding and empathetic. But this is kind of love in action, and it helps us to practice those qualities of like kindness and consideration and thoughtfulness, which are a really important part of relationships. So one behavior that I specifically want to talk about that the disasters did a lot, and John Gottman called it the sulphuric acid of relationships, is contempt. So contempt has an air of, I'm better than you. It's very judgy. It could be sarcastic. It could be like, what would you know? I read a lot more on this topic than you do. Or, oh, well, you're not very tidy, so, you know, you can't complain about my wet towel on the floor, or etc. So that contempt really can erode. And that's something that we can all watch out for. In conclusion, what I want to really say and share is that what truly makes a difference is those qualities like mutual respect, like consideration, like service to each other in ways that we find valued in, having empathy in our communication. And we sometimes overlook them because, you know why? This person loves me so much. They know me so well. I can misbehave and they'll be okay. They'll still love me. But this is an analogy I show couples, is I say, think about your relationship as a house. And these qualities are like the pillars and the foundation. And when you are practicing these, then these pillars and foundation are strong. But when you stop doing it, your pillars start to erode and your house becomes a little bit wobbly. And if you keep doing it, that relationship house could crumble. So it's really, really important to practice and demonstrate our love through this, which is, again, I do acknowledge it's really hard. When we're dysregulated, when we're really upset, it's the last thing you want to do is to just call on these qualities, but they're the ones that keep our relationship house intact. And so I'd like to end with a quote from the Baha'i writings, which I think really encapsulates not just this love in action, but also things like the bids for connection, etc., that I spoke about before. And it says, where there is love, nothing is too much trouble, and there is always time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nilly. I think I could have listened to you for another hour. So I think key points that I took away is that we're going to be turning towards, not turning away, with all our relationships. The men are going to kiss their wives before they leave the house. And that we're all going to be on the road to becoming masters and not disasters, right? So thank you so much for highlighting some key points in the short time that you had. Thanks, Nilly. It's now time for our Q&A, our question and answer time. So if anyone's got any questions, now is the time for any of our panelists.
The master's disaster scenario that you gave us and all, that's equally applicable for adults or parents with their children, I presume?
Yes, absolutely true. So a lot of what I said applies just as much to families as it does to couple relationships. And it's just that seeking to really connect and understand each other that really can make a difference. And one other bit that I just want to add, maybe, just as an extra little addendum to the masters. One thing the masters did well also is they really sought to understand each other well. You know, we change over time, and to ask each other really good open-ended questions. They could just be all kinds of fun things. I know that sometimes I've done it in the car with my kids, but it can really get you to think about and create self-awareness and also understanding. For example, a couple can ask each other, who do you think out of the people we know has the best relationship and why? You know, and then that could identify for them, what are the qualities that I see as important in a relationship from the others? You know, I've asked the kids sometimes, in the car, if you could acquire a particular quality without having to work for it, what would it be and why? So there's lots of little questions that we can seek to ask and understand from each other.
Nilly, another question for you regarding the masters and the disasters. How or what advice could you offer people or masters in influencing disasters in their individual lives?
So one of the other things that they found was that masters were good at accepting influence from each other. So say that you don't particularly like your mother-in-law and she's going to come over for a visit and stay for a few days and, you're not so happy about that. So the masters were much better at being able to go, well, this is important to my wife, for example, and I'm, doing this for her well-being and so on. But accepting influence can look in many different ways. It's really just, taking interest in each other and what we do and trying to sometimes not be so firm with, no, I'm not going to do this or I'm not going to go there. And, just being able to be open to that. So creating that openness, I think, is what helps with those situations. I hope I kind of answered your question without giving a 10-minute answer. Thank you.
A very big thank you to Relationships Australia for co-sponsoring with the Melville Baha'i community and for providing us with fabulous experts. Thank you all, and thanks to our fabulous panelists.
If you found today's episode useful, remember to share an episode with a friend and follow Mind and Soul Matters on your preferred podcast platform and on social media. Look forward to your company next time on Mind and Soul Matters.